Okay, hey everyone, welcome to our next episode of these crucial conversations that we've been a part of. We've called it Moving into the Discomfort. We've been trying to figure this space out, but really excited to be back with everyone. So I'm just going to ask everyone just to go around and introduce themselves. So, yeah.
I'm Shazy.
I'm Ambu.
I'm Slee.
Kamumadal.
Michael. Mike. Nice, thanks everyone. So for tonight's topic, we want to look at revolution. And we want to kind of define what that is and what that looks like in our context. We hear people speaking a lot about this revolution. So what is a revolution and how do we see it taking place in our current context, and what is it that we are a part of here?
In South Africa, it's basically the system of white supremacy and whiteness which has existed for 300 years into apartheid. 94, we thought there was going to be this rainbow nation where we're all going to, I don't know, it was Mandela's Canaan, from Egypt to Canaan. So we entered Canaan, there's no Canaan, the land is not flowing with milk and honey. You know, whiteness still reigns supreme. White supremacy is still oppressing us. The systems that existed for the last 200 years and in the last 50 years of apartheid are still around. So that is a system which I believe that this generation will call revolution if we are able to dismantle it and overthrow it.
Yeah. I read a stat the other day. I think white people make up 8.1% of our population,
What?
but they control 85% of the wealth. And that shows the disparity between the rich and the poor. And that speaks central to the idea of white supremacy being like the central pillar of this whole thing. And so when I think of a revolution, I almost get like, I don't even know.
I think of a radical change when we speak about a revolution. I think a whole bunch of our society pre-94, or maybe let's say post-94, they were naive enough to think that a revolution was going to bring about change overnight. I don't think people were well informed to know Guti. A revolution doesn't just bring change overnight. For apartheid to actually be part of the system, ingrained in the system, it took it years. And that is why it still exists. And 25 years after having the right to vote for everyone across the board, women, men, black and white, Indian, China, whatever, Chinese or Asian. But that system has still been there. So I don't know. I sit here and I wonder about, people talk about the Mandela era. And I wonder, like, were we that naive to think, Guti, Mandela's the first black president, so therefore things are changed, it's a new day. The Christian founder himself didn't bring about change overnight. And that's speaking into spiritual lives and all of the things that actually matter to a greater population of the world. He also, his movement is still.
So are you saying that revolution is a journey and that it's not, what is it influenced by, is actually my question, more than anything?
Yeah, so that's why I think that it is it's sort of a radical change. There has to be people on the ground sort of sparking conversations to happen. That has to happen. But there has to be an education of people who are subject to a system that has put them to a place where they think that they don't matter, that the play field is not equal and it's okay that way. There's a whole bunch of our population that thinks that, oh yeah, umlungu is special. Black people are not. There's still people who think that. People, you said it, 8.1% of the population is white. Yet all these guys were still a greater population in the rurals. You bring a white person there with a basketball or a soccer ball, they think, yes, this person is special. And it's only us who have been exposed to the suburbs, to the townships that are closer or emerging suburbs, as we want to call them lately. We are the ones who are like, oh, it's actually, they're not that special. We're not being negative about it. It's just, they're not that special. They're people just like us.
It means.
White people can also misspell in English. That stuff kind of changes you. You kind of go, oh, wow, like, we're actually better than them at some things and all of that. But when you take it to the greater majority, they still think, wow, something special.
When I think about revolution and in the South African context, I think it's the coming together of people. So what we're doing here is some form of revolution, because it's not reliant on the government. It's people actually changing the narrative and changing the way that the course of their future. That's how I look at revolution. Sort of, I think you and I had this conversation a couple of days, last week, I think, when we were trying to define what revolution was, if it was an event, like one major event, and sort of walked out of that conversation feeling like, no, it's actually those tiny occurrences that happen over time that influence changing the narrative. So for me, in the South African context, it's looking at the power of Fees Must Fall, what that was like if actually people didn't take the influence of the EFF, because when you look at it, the EFF took the wave and was riding it and took the benefits of what the youth were doing. And so for me, revolution was the power play, like the power dynamics, and actually seeing that it's us that have the power. We just allow and we give the government to the people that are in power to feel like they do have. But when you look at Fees Must Fall and you see the power that the students had to overthrow the government, to shift things around, if they didn't actually give in to the system, which is, politics. So I don't think that revolution in the South African context does anything to do with any political party, but everything to do with the people knowing that they have a voice and can foster change.
And just on what you're saying about Fees Must Fall, which is important, is that Adam Habib, I've said this before, Adam Habib was in an interview and he said what it had taken them more than 10 years as a vice chancellors to try and achieve. It took students in the Fees Must Fall 10 days to achieve it. So it is within the will of the people. It's just that what happened in 94 is that we had the vanguards who were elected into power who got duped by the Western mindset in terms of economy and just the social construct of South Africa,
Even
which
politics,
in politics and the apartheid special planning, which is still existent in South Africa, it did not change. How the hell can we say we had a national democratic revolution in South Africa in '94 when the special planning of South Africa is still there?
Yeah.
How, are we crazy or what?
Yeah.
You know. So we need to start really challenging that and say, why do we have this? And I can tell you that if the young people who after 1994 were born after 1994 and their generation can start challenging it, it would change.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to note, like, what you guys are saying, the political nature of revolution. So like you've got 94 and pre-94 throughout the 80s, where the ANC government, who is the vanguard of the struggle, is being co-opted by the West and by the National Party to in many ways sell out to a more neoliberal kind of palatable idea of what change is. And so when 94 comes, you have the same structural, the buildings are still there. If apartheid was a building, it's still there, it just gets vacated. White people get kind of pushed out, and there's different kind of space. The space just changes in that sense. But I think that it's important to note, even when you look at Fees Must Fall, is that the same thing happened. That the political nature of revolution is that the moment it becomes politicized on a partisan level, it misses the fire and the heat of what it looks like to be actually on the streets. Yeah. Green, dare I say blue as well, but green, blue, red. And we're talking about Fees Must Fall. There was a moment in 2016 when they marched in Joburg to Luthuli House, and Gwede Mantashe and his friends, his cohorts, came out of Luthuli House, and they expected to speak to the students, to address them. And I think if we view this event as being quite pivotal in our history at this point, was when they expected to address them, but a particular student, Vuyani Pambo, who you can represent, the young students in general, told them to sit down and to not address us. Sit down, we will talk to you. That, I think, was a pivotal moment in terms of young people, I think, gathering themselves and saying, where are we going with this? Obviously, post that, we see the same politicization that happened in '94, is that the ANC government uses its resources to co-opt the narrative of Fees Must Fall, and buy into it in various ways. But I think that if we're talking about revolution, like we've got to try and bypass the political nature that immediately co-opts the narrative.
Yeah.
That's why something like Rhodes Must Fall was never co-opted, because it went after whiteness at its core, and it has done radical things ever since then. So it's interesting. I think that when see, the thing with fees is that in terms of fees must fall, it was easy to co-opt that idea because it was a struggle that students were carrying for a long time. But it's very hard to co-opt a narrative that is directly going after whiteness. And I think it's particularly in this African context, if anyone talks about revolution, it should, both for white people, for black people and colored, Indian, etc. I think that's a starting point, is actually how to disrupt whiteness and whatever that system entails. I think that's a starting point.
So, yeah.
But we have a problem in South Africa, is that white people don't want to be part of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
We're at a point where this generation is just saying fuck white people, because we're at a point where we said we want to reconcile. White people don't want to reach out. White people don't want to be. We have one white guy in this conversation. White people don't want to be part of a conversation that addresses black pain and how to restructure our society so that it benefits those who could not benefit in the past, so that we change the social construct and the structure of the economy. They don't want to be part of it. The people who are saying reconcile, and want to talk about the future of the country, it seems to be black South African. It's like white people are holding 2 passports. They just ready. If shit goes, I'm ready, I'm going. Now, I don't know how many passports you have, Mike, but I just know you have one. So I just have an...
And visas.
And it's a fact. We need to start talking about this thing, that if this conversation does not move where white people take charge, we're going to fucking leave them behind. And maybe we must get to a point where white people just need, because I've had a lot of white friends go, Madonna, is this time that I should leave? Is things going to be, is Juju going to take off? And push it like that. So, and I'm at a point where I'm saying, just go and live quietly. Just go, because we're trying to build a country and conjure a way forward, which is going to be our revolution and a society that we're going to build for ourselves. And whoever wants to be part of it, and if you don't want to be part of it, just fuck off. Like, why are we still begging people to stay? Oh no, calm down. And the problem with the people who so-called our liberators in 94, Mandela and all of them, they were just scared of white people. They're scared of the West and scared of white people. Oh, white people should not leave. We must make sure we come. And every time we start talking about the real things, the core things that we must change in this country, we're always thinking, what about white people?
Yeah.
And that has to change. We need to start changing that conversation.
Just before I move the conversation on, Shezi, do you
Yeah,
have
so on that, I was thinking the same thing. So let me ask you a question in a particular way for a reason. So what of the people who would argue that South Africa has had its revolution? So 1994 was South Africa's revolution, a revolution being a major political change and a major change in political structure. And here we are, all 6 of us, discussing white power and whiteness, etc., etc. So what of the argument where people go, well, look at who's in government. It's majority black people. Look at the voters. It's majority black people. You look at the changes that happened in 1994. They were all geared towards black people or to help black people. So then you go, well, please tell me what still needs to change in this country if the structures that be are already pointing in that particular direction. And I'm asking that for a reason.
Yeah.
But that's what people are saying, that those structures haven't changed.
Yeah.
So that's the fact, is that you have the rhetoric having changed. You have the colors and posters and benches. Benches don't have only whites on. But the fact is that the system is there that continuously disempowers the majority of the country from an economic point of view, sociological, linguistic, cultural, in every single way. There's a disempowerment because it took 400 years to I mean, it's a massive system that is global in its context as well as local. So I think that's the core of it.
So what I was sneaking towards is why white people aren't buying in. Because I hang around with a lot of middle upper class white people, a lot. And a lot of them don't even think the things we're talking about exist. Like, forget about even disagreeing with them. They don't even think they're there.
Yeah.
So
The fact of the matter is, today in South Africa, you still have to try and convince people that racism exists.
Yeah.
It's like,
And you
Like-
also just have to look at the fact that there are black people who lived in any township.
Malokshi,
They're still living there now. Nothing has changed for them. They're still in that shack. White people have never had to lose anything. I mean, Mandela came around, rocked people up. Oh my gosh, all of it. Well, technically, all that happened in 1994 was that, okay, cool, you couldn't sit at a white-only bench. Now you can. You know, and I'm not discrediting some of the work that has happened, but in reality, white people will never get anything. One, they've never had to apologize. They don't understand the concept of what was done to black people. There are people, there are white people who are my mates who've never gone to a township, have no concept of what people live like. All they're seeing is, oh, Betty's rocking up today at 7 and she was at work at 7. She doesn't understand that Betty had to wake up at 4. She doesn't understand the narrative. And white people just don't care. That's the other thing. So in terms of the revolution, I think I'm at a point where I'm just really not asking for them to participate. If you're there, hallelujah for you, and let's see that translate in your life. But if you're not, that's also okay. I'm trying to empower our people now. So that, for me, that's what revolution looks like in South Africa. Like, for the longest time, it does not make sense to me that we wanna talk about whiteness, but we also must beg white people to come and talk about the thing that they are the most problematic of. So it's like a slave mentality still, where we're begging the slave master for his attention. Like,
And can I add on that, Shezi?
then I'll wrap this up.
Shezi, your answer, let me give you a simple answer. Somebody said, in terms of revolution, define revolution, I've already defined, but let me tell you this. South Africa is the only country where revolution took place and the oppressors lost nothing.
Sure.
There's never been that anywhere else. They remained in the position they were at. Nothing changed. They remained comfortable. In fact, white people will leave and go to UK, New Zealand, Australia, and they will feel disadvantaged in those countries because they miss where they're still powerful.
yeah.
There is no way where whiteness as such a powerful weapon or to be in power and an advantage like in South Africa. The only place where revolution took place and the oppressors lost nothing.
Sure.
Because you must understand that even if we're not talking about physical people, but whiteness reigns supreme in South Africa.
Yeah.
And it is still reigning. What kind of revolution is that? Somebody must explain to me that.
So,
Thanks, Mike.
so
Can we have Mike? We've got 2 minutes before we're on the 20-minute mark already. So quickly, Mike, you had a thought, and then we'll try to squeeze you in. Ambu, I'm sorry.
So it was just commenting on whiteness itself as well. To say that, again, saying that South African example is also very different to anywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
In the fact that when white people came to South Africa, so they came, Jan van Riebeeck, they came from the Dutch East India Company, from Netherlands and whatever the case is. But then this is the curious thing that happened with white people, is that they then separated themselves in their heads from Europe and became, that's when the Afrikaans people kind of birthed themselves. And even the word Afrikaans, has this connotation, this context of Africa, is that white people somehow found themselves in a context where they suddenly were making their home here. And so you've got a context where there's a sense of ownership that has come from purely out of nowhere. And then today we're dealing with people who are benefiting from that ownership and from the system that has crafted itself around that ownership. And I think ultimately, when you ask a white person, when they call themselves African or they're from South Africa, it's quite revealing, because it reveals something of the fact that we're a people who are we're so powerful that we actually don't even know where we're from, but we still own where we're at. Like that's the nature of South African whiteness. It is different to other forms of whiteness, and note that whiteness as a system is that it has ownership over a space that it isn't its own, and yet it doesn't even know where it's from. And I think it's quite an interesting notion, as well as showing how strong it is in terms of our culture.
Sure, Mike. Ambu?
yeah, I might be selling a novel here to you guys, and then I think that's the novel that ANC also sold into, because they were the the custodians of what revolution was supposed to be
Mm.
in South Africa at the time. And there's a lot, and I'm glad you said that you don't want to discredit a lot of stuff that happened
Yeah.
decade after decade, the ANC being involved in making sure that the play field is equal. I think that has been their message. Their message was never that once in power, we are going to disempower the people who are in power already. The African National Congress, by definition itself, African nationalism, it's sought to include everybody. It said we have recognized that you are being unfair. You are benefiting from a land that's not even yours over people that actually have ownership over it. That needs to change, comrade, but we are not going to throw you out. We are willing to even sit at the table with you and talk about how do we advance this as a people. If that's not going to happen, then we'll take up arms and get rid of you. And that was the conversation that was had. Umkhonto weSizwe is formed out of that. The ANC Youth League is formed under that sort of premise. And now we sit here and we think, we forget that none of the lobbying for 94 said that, you know, as soon as June 94, you're all going to have a house, you're all going to be this. I think the people who are in power, we should never reject the fact that they were intelligent enough to know that a revolution has its sparks. It's got its moments of sparks that happened along the way to help people journey into a place where we're addressing the issue of equality. Like, is the play field equal for our people? Give them houses, give them food. But if they're not educated still, you'll never have people talking like we are right now. The reason we are here now, we're educated enough to have those conversations. You cannot have that conversation with somebody who's not. They're not interested because they're hungry, they need shelter. For them, it's like, oh, this is beautiful, camera, lights, wow. Let's educate our people beyond academia. We're speaking in the car earlier on. Just beyond academia, let's speak about, you know, the sacredness of a human life. Let's speak about human dignity. Let's speak sanitation, all of that. Let's make the play field equal and say, when you see a white person, you're not seeing a super special person than you. When you see a suburban house and you see a rondavel somewhere in KwaZulu-Natal or in the Eastern Cape, it's no different. The quality of life doesn't have to be defined by a skin color. And I think that's the agenda that's being pushed.
Yeah, so...
I'm sorry, I wish we can continue, but I totally disagree with Ambo. I totally disagree with him, but we can continue.
Okay, let's
I just had to raise it. I disagree with him.
Let's continue with that, and then we'll move on, because the next section that I want to go into is how do we empower people? How do we actually carry on with this narrative of disruption and this revolution that
We can continue with my response to him into that.
So let's begin
Because I
with me
think
and
it
then
fits well. It fits well
because it is in line with what we're trying to define.
It is totally in line. So should we continue?
Yes, please. The floor is
So
yours.
what's the question? What's the question now?
You're answering Ambo, and then we're going, how do we...
No, what I'm saying is that let's start with that question. I'll answer him
Oh,
in
you
that
want him
within that
to
question.
ask the question?
Yeah.
Okay, so the question that I had with all that we were saying, we're speaking about the narrative and the little stories and the sparks that they are in terms of a revolution. My question is now, it's 25 years later, we're in this democracy and all this is going on. How do we continue to empower people in this space and allow revolution to take place?